In this lesson, I'll demonstrate how to create and record macros. And a later part of this lesson entails copying macros between workbooks. Okay, so let's begin. Let me first customize my quick access toolbar up on the top, since we'll be working with macros not only in this particular lesson but also in subsequent lessons. So I'm just going to go ahead and add a macro shortcut on my quick access toolbar. To do this, a couple of ways I can do it. I can go to my file menu and then do it, or I can simply click on the drop down arrow and customize my quick access toolbar right from here. So once I get a menu screen, I'm going to go to more commands. So once I click on more commands, it brings up the Excel options dialog box. And notice I have to find the view menu because the view tab contains the macro options. Okay, so I'm going to choose view, and this will list all of the tools that are part of the view tab up on my ribbon. Okay, so once I have all my commands, I'm just going to locate the tool called record macro, and I'm going to add to my quick access toolbar and simply click OK. And notice on my top quick access toolbar, here's the record macro button. Okay, now notice this just records it. It's not going to stop the macro. It just gives me one particular tool called record macro. I can of course add others as well by going back to my more commands, bring up the Excel options, bring up my view tab one more time, and the rest of the commands I just want to show you are the macros itself, and then I can view macro or view macros, which contains additional tools as well. So let's say if I add the entire macro to my quick access toolbar, click OK, and notice in this instance I have my drop down which lists the entire tools as part of my macro command on the ribbon. Okay, so instead of just one particular command or tool on the quick access toolbar, I can in fact have the entire tab that relates to the macro tools listed on my quick access toolbar. Okay, so a couple of ways you can customize your quick access toolbar, and this is generally helpful when you're dealing with day in and day out with some of these tools that you use on a regular basis. Okay, the other way to find the macros is under the view menu, and on my right side in the macros group it lists the same three commands. So I can either go here under the view menu and choose one of these commands under macro on the ribbon, or I can use my quick access toolbar and bring up the same three commands. So it's just easier working with quick access toolbar. Alright, great. So once we have customized our environment, let's begin by creating a macro. And a macro again is just a series of automated steps, and we essentially use these macros. For instance, if you have a large spreadsheet, or if you need to customize your spreadsheet from one user to the other, and you need to have these users simply run a macro instead of spending lots of time customizing their workbooks. Okay, so macros are very, very helpful and very powerful. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up a new workbook here. In fact, I'm going to go online and find a workbook. I'm going to search, or I can just pick any of these templates. Let's pick the garden planner here. Okay, so plant inventory. So let's create, and Excel is going to download and open this workbook for me. So plant inventory has 4 worksheets. First worksheet is plant inventory. Then I have the seed starting log, task list, and then garden planning grid. Okay, so in this particular workbook, I'm going to create a macro that's going to add worksheets to this workbook. Okay, so for instance, it may be helpful if you need to send this workbook out to multiple users, and each user is going to create additional worksheets, like we have the ones below here: plant inventory, seed starting log, task list, garden planning grid. Instead of having each user create additional worksheets, what you can do is you can create a macro, and all that user does is simply click once to run the macro or execute the macro, and Excel is going to automatically add however many sheets you wish the users to have. Okay, so let me in fact demonstrate this. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my plant inventory. It's my first worksheet here, and go up to my quick access toolbar, bring up my macro tool here, and notice I have three options here. View macros, which means if I have existing macros that I already created, I can click on view macros and it will bring up the macros dialog box. So right now obviously there are no macros that I created, so I'm going to cancel, go back to my macros, and then in this instance I'm going to click record macro. Now please note that when you start recording macro, every step that you do after you hit this tool, it is going to be recorded. In other words, saved within the Excel environment, and Excel is going to remember it. Keep recording your steps. Excel is going to keep memorizing these steps. Okay, and once we stop the macro, we can save it and then later run it or later reuse it. Okay, so let's click on record macro. So once I click on it, it brings up the record macro dialog box, and it asks me for a name. So I'm going to say adding new worksheets. I can also assign a shortcut key such as control any letter would be fine. If it's available, control G, and it's going to store the macro in this particular workbook only. Okay, I can have this macro for a new workbook, personal macro workbook, or this workbook. So I'm going to choose this workbook for now, and optionally I can also give this macro a description. This macro will add new worksheets, and click OK. Now as soon as I click OK, at this point everything that I do from here on out is being recorded. Okay, now Excel doesn't really tell me on the screen that whether it's recorded or not, but since I've clicked OK, I ran the macro, I recorded the macro, I am recording the macro. In fact, everything that I do will be recorded. So I'm going to go ahead and add new worksheets. Simply right click on my plant inventory, move or copy. I'm going to go ahead and create a copy of this worksheet called plant inventory. Click OK, and Excel creates a copy and names it as plant inventory 2. Okay, so I'm going to double click on it, call it new plant inventory. So we have a copy of this. So we have plant inventory and a copy of the same worksheet called new plant inventory. Same thing, seed starting log, right click, simply copy this. I'm just going to do this quickly here. Rename it just like we did before. Call it new seed starting log. And of course I can move this next to the existing worksheet so they stay together. Same thing with task list. Simply right click, move or copy. I'm going to create a copy, click OK. And give it a name, new task list. And move this also next to it. And my last worksheet is garden planning grid. I'm going to copy this too. And I'm going to create a copy of this and also call it new. Okay, so I have about 8 worksheets now. Move it to the right. So plant inventory, and then I have the new plant inventory, seed starting log, new one. In fact, let me move this to the side so they're all synchronized. All right, great. Plant inventory and then a new plant inventory, seed starting log, a new seed starting log, task list, a new task list, and then garden planning grid, and then I have my final worksheet as the new garden planning grid. All right, next I like to make some additional changes. So for instance, the new plant inventory worksheet is a copy of an existing. So let's say if I need to change some of the colors here or do some formatting or anything that you wish to do. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and change some of these, maybe do some fill here that identifies as a new planned inventory worksheet. Okay. Same thing with my new seed starting log. I can change the date and put anything that I wish to choose, and do the same thing, maybe do some formatting here. Similarly, new task list. I'm going to do some formatting here for the task list. Make this image a little bigger. And then my garden planning, make some changes. Customization to my new garden planning grid. In fact, make sure I have my right worksheet here selected first. And do some additional please notes below. Okay. Make it bigger. All right. So again, the point is that everything that I'm doing right now is being recorded, although you cannot see those steps right now. But later when we run the macro, you'll notice everything will be done automatically. So let's say you've now customized your Excel workbook. And of course, you can always do any customization. If you need to add new formulas, for instance, or add certain things, change something within your workbook, Excel is going to keep recording your steps. Okay, so you get the idea. So let's say I'm done recording. I can go to my view menu, go to macros, and then click on stop recording. Okay. Notice stop recording option is available on my ribbon under the view menu here, or I can always go up to my quick access toolbar. Notice the stop recording icon is also displayed, and this shows me that I'm in the recording mode, and unless I stop, Excel is going to keep recording all my steps. Okay. So I'm going to click on stop recording, and notice as soon as I click stop recording, the icon changes on my quick access toolbar and gives me the ability to record another macro or a new macro. So let's test our macro, whether it's been recorded or not. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all these new worksheets. So I'm going to right click, delete, and right click again and delete all of the new worksheets that I just created earlier. So I'm just going to right click, delete here, delete my new task list. And let's see, what do I have left here? New planned inventory, delete this part also. So we have our basic 4 worksheets: planned inventory, seed starting log, task list, and garden planning grid. Okay, so this was our original workbook. Now the idea of a macro is, of course, that if I were to give this workbook to other users or have multiple users within the organization, instead of having them create and make changes to each of these worksheets and copy these worksheets one by one, they can simply run a macro and each user will get the exact same workbook. Okay, so this is a good way of making sure that you're creating a standardized environment within your Excel workbook. Okay, so let's see if we can run the macro that we just created. Go up to my macros, and then I can either choose to view macros, which I'm going to do, and notice right here is the macro that I created earlier called adding new worksheets, and this instance it gives me the option to run the macro. Okay, I can edit the macro by clicking on step into, and this will take me to the Visual Basic for Macros editor, and I can edit some code as well. Okay, so make sure my macro is selected, click run, and notice in a matter of seconds Excel runs the macros and creates the additional worksheets that I created as part of my macro. So here's my new planned inventory, and notice it keeps the formatting whatever I made. New seed starting log, new task list, and new garden planning grid. Let me also show you the Visual Basic code behind these macros, so you're able to see actually all these steps. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click on macros, bring up our existing macro by clicking on view macro, brings up the macro dialog box, And here's the macro we just created called adding new worksheets was the name of the macro. And instead of running it, I'm going to click on step into. And what this does, this will open up the Visual Basic Editor, or I can click edit also. Okay, so I'm going to click on step into, and this will take me to the Microsoft Visual Basic for Applications. Garden Planner 1 is the name. And then this lists the steps that were recorded. Okay, so for example, Sheets Plant Inventory, I selected this particular sheet as my first step. Okay, and then subsequent steps are listed. If I scroll down, you'll notice each of these steps are listed with the commands respectively. Okay, of course I can change this, so if I need to change any of this code, for instance, I can always change and have Excel do the task accordingly. Okay, so for instance, so if I like the font size not to be 22, instead this should be 20, for example, I can simply change it right here. Okay, and I can save it, of course, when I'm done, and Excel will save the macro. So this is a good way to edit your macros. Okay, so if you need to change something, just open up the Microsoft Visual Basic for Applications and do some changes. So in my left navigation pane, you can see that it shows the Microsoft Excel objects, and then the module, which is module 1, is part of my macro. Okay, all right, great. So next I'm going to demonstrate how to move macros or copy macros from one workbook to the other. It's very helpful to move the macro and apply it to another workbook. Okay, so instead of recreating the macros, you can always copy those macros from one workbook to the other. So next, let me demonstrate that for you. In this tutorial, we'll take a look at how to copy macros between workbooks. So what are macros? They're essentially just actions captured by using the record macro command, or snippets of handwritten code which are used to complete repetitive tasks or accomplish complex procedures. So essentially, macros are recorded as a Microsoft Visual Basic for Applications code and are stored in modules. And the way you access these macros is you have to go to the Visual Basic editor to edit the macros and modules. And not to worry, unless you're comfortable working with the VBA code, the safest and easiest way to copy macros from workbook to workbook is to copy the entire VBA module itself. But first, you need to make sure that your developer tab is visible on the ribbon. So let me just demonstrate how that's done. Notice up on the menu, there's a developer tab. I already have this enabled, so I'm going to show you how to go about enabling it if you don't have it on your screens. Okay, so to do this, you go to File, bring up your Backstage view, and go to Options. Brings up the Excel Options dialog box. Simply select Customize Ribbon and navigate to the Customize Ribbon pane, and then this will give you an option called Developer tab. And notice in this instance it's checked. That's how I was able to see it on my screen. So if you uncheck it, let me scroll down a little bit and click OK. Notice it disappears. So to bring that back up, go to File, Options, and then Customize Ribbon, and then simply check the Developer checkbox. Once you're done, simply click OK, and this will bring the Developer tab. And the Developer tab itself has various options, and one of the options is on the left side is the Visual Basic Editor. So let's say this is our book 1, which is our source workbook, and I'm going to go ahead and open up another workbook by using the keyboard, Control N for new, and this brings up a book 3. So right now I have book 1 and book 3. Okay, book 2 was closed. That's why Excel uses the sequential order of opening new workbooks. So my source and destinations are open. Okay, and the next thing I want to do is to copy the macros. So go back to a Developer tab, bring up your Visual Basic Editor by clicking on the Visual Basic on the ribbon. This brings up the Microsoft Visual Basic for Applications. And notice the ribbon X code is a macro contained in this module called the VBA project. And here's my book 1, and then my VBA project is book 3. So I have my source and my destination workbooks. So if you have macros within these workbooks, you can simply drag and drop and copy. And I'm just going to demonstrate this by using the VBA code to drag and drop. So if I like to use the ribbon X code macro, I simply drag and drop onto the module in my first workbook. Okay, and here it is. Likewise, if I need to drag and drop the ribbon X code 1 from my book 1 to book 3, I can simply drag and drop this to the book 3. And under modules, automatically ribbon X code 1 is copied. So it's really that simple, copying macros from one workbook to the other. And once you're done, simply close out of the Microsoft Visual Basic for Applications editor and save your workbook. So I hope this helps. A quick tutorial how to copy macros from one workbook to the other. So go ahead, practice, and let's move to our next lecture.